Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggles. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and I'm really happy today that we have a guest, Chrisley Carpio, who's a national student leader of the Students for a Democratic Society. But before we get to Chrisley, I want to talk a little bit about, well, first let me thank people for tuning in. And for those of you who have subscribed or told others about our podcast, I really want to thank you because it's as a new podcast, we need to get up and running and get listeners. And I appreciate those who have listened and tuned in. And also, I'd encourage new listeners to look back to some of our past guests. We've had some great interviews here. But I want to take a minute to talk about some of you who have sent me emails. And if you're interested in doing that, by the way, it's richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. And some of you have suggested that we try to move in a more theoretical direction. And, I've resisted that. I've said we're going to have academics on our podcast, on our first one when we talked, and we haven't done that yet, but I promise we will. But we look at Fight Back Radio, we look at this podcast as kind of the books meet the street, academics and people that are actually active in struggle. And for those of you that listen to past episodes, we've had real leaders of the struggle talking about their practice and what they've done and how that fits in to the different theories that people on the left and progressive people put out there. And I also want to say, I'm not dissing theory here. I think that is very, very important. And that's why I want to, direct people to Fight Back News, which is news and views of the people's struggles. But Fight Back News has a series now called Red Theory. And these are articles, theoretical articles written by Jay Sykes. They're concise to the point. I think they're understandable. That talk about some of the more difficult elements of left or socialist theory. And some of this, can get a little abstract at times. But that's, even with a materialist philosophy, that is by necessity the case. That and it's important to drill down and understand those things. But then, come back to Fight Back Radio and listen to how people are actually interpreting these things and do it yourself. Get out there and fight for a better world and see how that fits into the theories that we have. So I encourage people to go to Fight Back News, Jay Sykes's series on Red Theory. If you want, you can. I also want to tell people about there's on if you go to YouTube and then search for Tanky Talk, you can get these same articles in an audio version. So Tanky Talk on YouTube Radio, and then finally. I want to, our friends at Freedom Road Socialist Organization, FRSO.org, have put together, used these articles by Josh Sykes and done a study series, study sessions. And then, you can go to FRSO.org and sign up for these study sessions. They're on Zoom. The next one is August 25th, which is coming up quick. Past sessions you can find on YouTube as well. So if you just go to YouTube and look for Red Theory 1, Red Theory 2, like that. So, and we're going to put all this in the show notes, so you'll be able to see that there. But now let me tell you a little bit about the interview and our today's guest, Chrisley Carpio. Chrisley, as I said, is a national leader of the Students for a Democratic Society. She's an active member of the University of South Florida, or the Tampa-based chapter of SDS. And my good listeners of Fight Back Radio, I have a confession to make to you. This interview, I've been holding back on releasing this interview because Chrisley and others in SDS have asked me to wait until the beginning of the college school year to release this. And we actually did the interview over Memorial Day weekend, and there was a lot of activity in SDS last year, and you'll get that from listening to Chrisley, and she'll talk a lot about that. But I do want to point out that so, for example, the Roe versus Wade decision had not been made yet at that time, but the Supreme Court Justice Alito's draft decision had been leaked, and so we talk a little bit about that, but it's before the actual decision had been made. And so also, I want to tell people about some of the actions that SDS did since then around Roe versus Wade. Right after that interview, right during finals week at Kent State, they had a huge march of over 300 people that SDS led and called for. And also the SDS chapter, and there's many of these across the country, but these are a couple I'm aware of. The University of Minnesota called for a march, the SDS chapter there, and along with others, turned out over 10,000 people. The movement's growing, and we talk about that here as well. Now, Chrisley and others in SDS have called for a national day of action around reproductive rights for September 7th. So if you're able to, I want to encourage everybody on September 7th to go to a march in your city or on your campus. And if not, September 6th or 8th or whatever, or organize something around this National Day of Action. And then finally, I want to say that if you're a student or a student, SDS is going to have their annual national meeting in Kent, Ohio on October 15th and 16th. And so in the show notes, we're going to put all the information I'm giving you here, but also how to contact SDS. And we want you to do that. And also, if you know a student or if you're a student yourself, tell other students about this interview. I think Chrisley does a good job of bringing the excitement of what's going on in the student movement right now, and telling us some of what's going on. So take a minute now, listen to the remarkable Chrisley Carpio.
Well, hello, Chrisley. Welcome to Fight Back Radio. We're glad to have you here, and we're glad to we're looking forward to hearing about what's going on the campuses across the United States.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Richard. This is really exciting, and Fight Back Radio is an excellent podcast, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk about what the students are up to and their great achievements.
Oh, that's fabulous. So let's start off. So you're a lead organizer for the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS.
Yep, for New Students for a Democratic Society. That's right.
So what is that? What is New Students for Democratic Society?
Right. So it is a national progressive student activist organization. We have over a dozen chapters, and then there are some more, but like of varying degrees of activity. We have chapters all across the country, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And it's, what it sounds like, students who are fighting for democratic rights and for people to live better lives and for more resources for students on campus in solidarity with other people's movements. And we say new because we see ourselves as a successor to the old SDS of the 60s, but we also know that we have our own identity as well.
So by the successor, so you embrace that name, and you embrace the legacy of the main student group that was involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement in the 60s and early 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. We think it's a really proud history. We did get refounded in 2006, so there's not an unbroken lineage, as amazing as that would be. But we see that they rose up against the unjust invasion and the attacks on Vietnam, and SDS got refounded in 2006 after the unjust invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. Right, there was a huge surge in student protests around there, and that's kind of where we restarted, and what brought us here today.
So you're an activist organization. You're not like a policy group or a lobby group or something like that. So the things that you're talking about that you're interested in, we'll dig into some of the issues here in this podcast. But you're organizing educational protests, that sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. We encourage students to take direct action, to fight directly for the things that will make their campus better, whether it's lowering tuition or increasing Black enrollment or defunding their campus police. We tell them, look, you have the power to do this. You should, whether it's a petition or a panel or a straight protest, you should kind of take it up yourself. And, it also has the added benefit of educating, like all people on their campus about the issue as well, right? So they can speak out to administration, and also more people will learn about the issue.
So let me ask you about an issue. The this decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, that Judge Alito's draft of that was just leaked, and it's created a little bit of a stir. Can you tell me, has SBS been involved in this issue, and if so, how so?
Yes, absolutely. It has outraged so many of our students. It's galvanized a lot of chapters to organize around it. We've actually been organizing around this issue for longer than just the last month, since essentially last year, since the start of the fall semester, with the passage of SB 8 in Texas, right? The heartbeat bill or abortion ban bill, really, that they had there. We had
Can
student
you tell our
chapters.
Listeners a little bit what SB 8 is?
Yeah,
Senate
yeah.
Bill 8, I guess.
Yes, so Senate Bill 8 in Texas actually ends up restricting the ability of healthcare providers to provide abortions to people with pregnancies 6 weeks or up, which is just outrageous. So that was what sparked a flurry of students organizing. And, the fall semester started up after a period of campuses being shut. So from the get-go, our students at the SDS chapters at University of Texas Austin, University of Texas Arlington, they had to move fast. And it ended up being huge. So we just have had chapters organizing around their own version of this issue from place to place since then.
So the student movement in SDS was on the front edge of this, and they seem to have seen, even before the leaked document I referred to, as states started passing these laws, that this was coming. So what have the protests looked like around the country?
Yeah, so that actual protest that I mentioned kind of right out of the gate in the fall semester, because people had not been organizing on campus for such a long time, it really took students by surprise. Those SDS chapters, they called for a protest at the state capitol. It ended up bringing out 200 students who, some caravan with them, some met them there. And they themselves said that the students got really, they were so outraged that they themselves wanted to storm the Capitol. And the organizers, found themselves in the position of, okay, let's keep everyone together and let's do this, right? So that was actually, when people realized, okay, this is going to be a huge issue. And then not long after, the Florida legislature announced their own version of the bill. And that's what the chapter that I'm in and other Florida folks have, been doing for the last semester, is we're reacting to that one.
And recently, I heard in Minnesota, there was a protest recently as well that was large with students.
Yeah, absolutely. Texas and Florida, those SDS chapters opened the door, and, we have regular calls where we've been talking about, how to make these protests happen and what messaging to use and what tactics are you using. So by the time the document came out leaking that the Supreme Court was on the verge of overturning Roe v. Wade, our chapters were ready, and a lot of chapters had huge responses, right? So Kent State had 200 students come out. Austin, Texas, again, had hundreds of students come out in a storm. And the University of Minnesota SDS chapter had a protest of historical size when it comes to protests that are just of students, of 1,000 students who came out militantly to march against the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So that's just, it's been a lot.
So one of the issues I know that people that support the choice side of the issue have been arguing is the issue of safety. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes, absolutely. So, one thing that has been kind of repeated in almost every speech, it is at the forefront of the minds of our members who are young people, right, who are coming of age. They say if a person needs an abortion, if a woman needs an abortion, then they're going to try to get one anyway. And there have been so many people who've died, so many women who've died over hundreds, thousands of years trying to get an abortion. And whether it was from trying to get an abortion and it wasn't safe, or carrying to term an unsafe pregnancy, it's just something that has claimed so many lives. And SDS, views it as an important issue of health. And, people say that the right to a safe legal abortion is healthcare, and it's a human right that we have to defend and fight for. There's also the economic aspect as well, where people aren't getting paid to have more kids, right? They're going to find themselves impoverished by having kids that they can't afford. So that's something we've also been addressing.
Yeah, and it's an issue that's really, historically has moved people in the women's movement as well, which as a student organization, I'm sure that appeals to you as well. But the issue of women's rights is important to SDS. Why is that, or how does that look in your in your chapters and as people debate these issues?
Right. Yeah, I definitely totally agree that this is an attack on women's rights, right? And it's an attempt to send women back to the kitchen. And we've been including mentioning women's rights in a big way in a lot of our literature and our messaging and slogans. There has been a lot of debate kind of within the student movement around how much to discuss it, though. One thing that people learn maybe from folks who are not really in the social movements, they hear all the time about the flaws of all the social movements. And there are questions over what about the backwards or transphobic or racist parts of the women's movement, is this a movement that is done that, we don't want to be associated with? And, one thing that's kind of come up that people were disappointed in the Women's March, right? They were disappointed. And even though it was huge, it didn't really happen more than a couple of times. It kind of split over the question.
These are the marches right after Trump got elected?
Yes, right after Trump got elected. They were humongous. They were easily the largest marches maybe under Trump's whole time. It was I think, it was definitely hundreds of thousands of people. Was it 1 million people in New York City?
There was hundreds of thousands in my city, in Chicago, just alone.
Right, exactly. But the messaging itself did not go that far beyond we have to stop the way these forces talk about women and the rape culture that Trump perpetuates. Not that those are really important issues that should be talked about, but what about things like choice? What about the economic questions of working women? What about women who aren't white, right? So, and then again, it ended up splitting over the question of Palestine. So this has led a lot of students to kind of question to what extent we should link this to the women's movement. But SDS kind of came out on the side of saying we should try to lead the women's movement and to forge alliances with the LGBTQ movement and all people who deserve the right to have autonomy over their body, right? So, and at least that's definitely how I have viewed it. If people have not viewed it that way, they should hit me up.
So it was a strategic question that happened, and so of who you should unite with and who you shouldn't, how pure the SDS position should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in most places, what you're saying is they went broad.
Yes.
So they said, let's unite with the women's movement.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, a lot of it was the Democratic Party, at least in Chicago, I know where I am, that was in the leadership of those marches and people that are close to that. Is it difficult to unite with them, or do they tend to just kick you to the curb, or how do you deal with that?
Well, it's actually been pretty great reaching out to a lot of those forces because they have been receptive. Like the vestiges of the Women's March, there will be Women's March coalitions in different cities. I know that in Jacksonville there was one that helped students put on protests. I know that in some cities across the Midwest that was definitely the case. And that's a great place to start when you're just one student group looking for other people to put on this protest with you. And even the groups that maybe had different views about LGBTQ questions were also still present in this movement with SDS. Definitely some of maybe the historical groups that people identified as radical feminists still came out for the, stop Roe v. Wade defend Roe v. Wade protests, right? That was a reality. And, our students were happy to have them at the protests. So it just came to a question of, well, we're facing disagreement from, this or that group on campus about, how much we say women's rights, what should we do? Here's the thing too, even those groups who may have disagreed with kind of how to use that ended up coming to all these protests. We were able to unite, all these different, from the most Democratic Party focused, that's just the only thing they want to talk about, to the more, maybe some groups that are not as enthusiastic about talking about, kind of like the question of gender to, and they're just interested in like women's issues to, kind of like trans student unions. Like SDS has been able to organize with all of these groups and these struggles, which, it was a debate worth having.
So within your organization, it sounds like, where do your members line up? Are they, it sounds like they're not in the Democratic Party or in the center of it anyways. But what is the ideology, if there is one, of SDS, and how do you deal with things like that?
Right. Yeah. We're definitely, it's full of radical students in that, students want to take matters into their own hands and not just stop at the question of educating, but also, fighting for change on a systemic level. Right. But we're actually, we keep it broad and progressive in SDS, right? It is a group that does not have a leftist tendency. We call it, a multi-issue, multinational, non-tendency student group, because anyone who wants to organize around these issues are welcome. And they should come out whether they are a leftist or not, right? If you just simply want to defend, your right to an abortion, you should come out. You can identify as SDS. We don't have that requirement. That said, it is a natural home for leftists, and socialists of all stripes, because, who else will be drawn as quickly to, some of all of these issues as this, right? So, that's definitely, something that's still true in SDS to this day.
You also mentioned that the gender issues were what may be divisive in recent debates, and especially as you decided whether to or how to, not whether to, support the pro-choice movement and defending women's rights to choose. And so I'm wondering. I know you're from Florida, and the Don't Say Gay law that the governor just pushed and passed and is there. Could you talk a little bit about how gender plays out in SDS and how it did, and maybe in this debate as well?
Yeah, totally. So SDS actually has a ton of queer students in it, which is great. It's awesome, and we celebrate that, and we definitely want to. We want students to be able to express themselves, however, and be tolerant of absolutely, all like gender expressions. So that is a reality, and it's moved us to, say, okay, we should not be isolated from the women's movement, but we should also encourage it to build bridges with these other movements. And, it needs to start somewhere, and we can be that group, right, that can have all these speeches in one protest. And as a result, our SDS chapters also are moving on the question of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. Florida State University has had multiple protests about that issue now. To this point, Kent State University in Ohio, which is a state that also has their own version of anti-trans legislation, is moving on that question. Lawrence University in Wisconsin has their own version of that anti-trans legislation. So it's it was a natural move for a lot of our chapters to talk about, the right to an abortion, which is something that not only women should, deserve, but all people, such as trans men and, non-binary people for whom this is relevant. It was a natural move from us to go from that to talking about, stopping the Don't Say Gay bills. And often these bills were perpetuated by the same people, right? The same right-wing, religious, I don't know if I should call them religious fanatics, but, that's, they're trying to force us, so.
No, I think that's probably right. So, at least in many of the cases, in many of the talking heads. Let me ask you about just the student movement in general, but maybe SDS in particular. How do you see it, your role in movements for change? I mean, students are in a unique place in society in that, they're young adults, their energy, they're questioning and coming up with their own views of the world. But they're also placed within, people that aren't as movable, and whether it be very conservative or more progressive groups like organized labor or whoever. So how do you see the student movement as a movement, as a light or a movement for change?
Yeah, no, so many social movements had a student component, or maybe even began or were restarted with, student protests. I mean, you've mentioned earlier the role that, the first SDS had to play in being a huge voice against the Vietnam War and, bringing a whole new generation of, people who were questioning the status quo, right? And who were supporting, rights of African Americans, right? And, the movement for liberation and in different places. And I think that's still true today. Maybe it's not as widespread as it was, but we're working on that. We're definitely trying to make that reality. And, students show solidarity for, in SDS today for a variety of movements. A pretty important one is definitely the movement for the liberation of Palestine. Routinely we have SDS chapters having protests or actions. And, recently the attacks on the Al-Aqsa prayers in the mosque by Zionist forces, SDS chapters either held protests or joined up protests around that. We have a history of supporting boycott, divest, and sanction campaigns from city to city. So, yeah, it's definitely kind of like a really important point for us.
Let me ask you about you just mentioned the issues of, international issues of war and peace. And the old SDS really got its legs, I think, in its fight against the Vietnam War. And that war was very popular at first. I mean, it was, there was a manufactured Gulf of Tonkin incident, etc. But as the students probably more than anybody else in this country really turned, the society in their thinking. But we're on the edge of maybe joining a war right now. There's a barrage of on the TV and all the media about support the Ukraine and let's send arms to them and actually lots of arms, lots of money is being spent.
Yeah.
And what's the position of National SDS on war in the Ukraine or war with Russia?
Yeah, we say no to that war wholeheartedly, right? We think that the U.S. government should focus on taking care of its people at home and, fighting the pandemic that's still going. There are so many things that the U.S. government can be doing and funding for people's benefit and, starting a war with Russia, exacerbating the conflict with Ukraine is not it. And that is something we've even had SDS chapters that had protests around that. And, I don't know what it was like at the beginning of the anti-Vietnam War movement. I don't know if it was anything like this where it's been pretty tough. It's not, they're not huge protests. And we actually get messages from different, students who are very far from supportive and actually say like, oh, you guys are totally wrongheaded about this. And, that's been a little bit new for us because that hasn't happened for a while. But, we think it's a principled stance and we, people might call us Putin apologists, which is definitely not true. We just don't think that there should be a war with Russia.
Yeah, no, it seems, the NATO expansion and we're not sending, humanitarian aid to Ukraine, or maybe we are, but we're mostly sending guns and things that'll create more, that won't end the war, that'll prolong it. Yeah. And so, no, I appreciate your point of view on that. Also, I wanted to ask you about, some of the issues that I know, because you're a multi-issue group, so I can jump around and talk about a whole bunch of stuff. So I hope I'm not jumping too fast here. But I want.
No, this is great.
I want. Yeah. What's next?
It's exciting.
But next is police accountability. I know some of your chapters have been involved in dealing with issues of police crimes and trying to hold police accountable for things that they've done. Can you talk a little bit about some of the experiences your organization has had? Yeah, absolutely. So even though campuses were shut down in 2020 because of the pandemic, we still we were still active, right? And we were still meeting, even if it was through Zoom. And by the time that George Floyd was murdered and people were rising up against it, all our students kind of went out into the streets, went to as many downtown protests as they could. A few students tried having campus protests around it anyway, right? And administration went in and tried to break it up, but we definitely wanted to be still in that movement, and we tried to continue it as best as we could after the uprising kind of, started reaching its slow point. Our slogan for the conference last year, we have an SDS conference every year, it was actually "The Uprising Continues."
and it was talking about, okay, how can we bring this militancy to our campuses? And a slew of campuses started campaigns to defund campus police, to demilitarize them, to put hiring freezes on police officers, and just demanding police accountability. And in fact, my own chapter at the University of South Florida in Tampa actually did win cuts to the police budget and to the pay of officers of, just 5%. It doesn't sound like much, but it was a big deal.
No, it sounds like it. That is a big deal, and this is a huge movement around the country to try to hold police accountable, because it can actually make real changes in people's lives. I wanted to move also, though. I was speaking with one of your SDS members in Chicago at the University of Illinois Chicago, and they were telling me that the enrollment, black enrollment at the University of Illinois Chicago is 7%, and I know the population, the African American population of the city of Chicago is well over it's 35-40%, I think. I'm not sure the exact number, but it's more than 7%, and so they were telling me that so they're starting a campaign to try to increase black enrollment, and I want to know, is that something that's unique to UIC, or is that something going on other places as well?
Yeah, that's definitely a very popular campaign amongst our chapters, and it's one that my own chapter is is kind of involved in. We have something similar happening where in a city where at least 25% of the population is African American, the school's representation of African Americans is 9% or less, because it's going down now. And they're lying and saying it's going up, but it's going down. And there are plenty of chapters that have taken up this issue as well. And there was actually, the University of North Florida in Jacksonville won a historic victory around this issue. They were actually the first, kind of within the last 5 years, to do it, and it emboldened a lot of our chapters to take it on. And this was 2017, so it was before the George Floyd uprising, right, where they had white supremacists making fun of BLM protests and posting hateful things about black activists online, and the university wasn't doing anything about it. So they had these huge, the SDS chapter had these huge historic protests. This is a city where well over 30% of the population is African American, but 4% of UNF was black. Just 4%. It was pathetic. And they actually had protests in the next year, and they won scholarships for Black and Latino students. They won so many things. And by the next year, there was a historic admission of more black students than ever at their school. After a year of protests, they even had a protest where it was mostly faculty that came out, and that's quite hard to do since it's their jobs, So.
No, it shows a certain level of courage, especially in this day where they're, banning, teaching of critical race theory, and as you said, the don't say gay, and so many things. That so for faculty, it's much more difficult to stand up and do what's right. So hats off to them for sure. Also, me ask again about this about the enrollment, because it seems it's the issue as you started to address it. There's all kinds of things around it as well, because it costs a lot of money to go to college. So it's not just we're being racist and not letting them in, but so there's issues of admissions, of what their primary or secondary education might have been, what the like I said, tuition, what their family obligations are, things like that. Have you started, or have you thought about addressing those kind of issues as well?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the most horrible arguments that, because we've had meetings with administration locally around this question, and one of the horrible arguments they tried saying was, well, we're not going to try to recruit more students who are not going to graduate, or, we're more interested in increasing graduation rates. And, we think that's just, it's unfounded, and it's a really racist assertion that they're making when there is a whole slew of factors that, will keep like a young African American person from fully excelling in school, right? Whether it's, in the state of Florida, public schools are actually funded by property tax and not, doesn't have like a solid state funding of its own. And it's our only state scholarship that, students can get in like a commonplace sort of way or, have easy access to, is funded by the lottery, the Florida lottery. So it's like a way to keep the state from having to use real funds, right? So one of the things that we proposed to administration, which they have yet to take up, is they promised that they would after the George Floyd uprising. Interestingly enough, they said, "Oh yeah, we're totally going to do this," but they haven't done it yet. Is they need to recruit from the local neighborhoods, right? Instead of recruiting and getting students who they think will bring the most money to the school, because that's their main approach is, okay, let's get the out-of-state students who have had tutors their whole lives, who, have been applying to all these Ivy League schools. Let's get them instead, or, students who pay a higher tuition for whatever reason, go to the local high schools, like the Black majority high schools whom you've been neglecting, and recruit directly from there, right? So, and they actually, because of the George Floyd uprising, they came out and said that they agreed that that was the best tactic and they would do it. They just haven't followed through on that promise yet. So it's definitely intentional, right? Instead of, meeting the needs of local students who are doing everything they need to do, right? They're getting good grades. They're doing all these extracurriculars, everything that they've been told they should do, they're doing. They're still not being looked at as the primary students to bring into the college. It's students who will pay more, like out-of-state students who, are the school's main focus.
Well, yeah, it sounds like racism, and
yeah.
Not only do we need to get them into the colleges, we need to support them once they're there.
Yes.
I mean, it's like if people aren't graduating,
Yeah.
you have to say, well, why is that the case?
Right.
You need to start asking the questions, and
Yeah.
it sounds like some of these university heads, including the University of Illinois at Chicago, are not doing that.
Right.
One of the issues I wanted to ask about too is about student worker alliances, which is something that whatever, it's for a long time it didn't exist, and then it started to peak, and I honestly don't know where it's at right now. And I'm a trade union activist, and I actually worked at a university for a long period of time, at the University of Chicago for 20 years, and the student support we got for our movement of trying to get justice for workers at the university was incredible and important, I think. So does that exist in your chapters? Do people do things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a rich history of SDS chapters supporting like worker unionization efforts or strikes, or like even the Harvard dining workers. I don't remember the exact year, but they organized and had a strike for their first contract, right? And the students had walkouts and sit-ins. So it's historically their University of Minnesota, SDS, whom I've mentioned already, has done plenty of that. And today there's a lot of students, calling for increases to their own wages. A lot of campus workers, work in the dining halls for Aramark or Sodexo, and they're getting paid like criminally low wages, and they still have tuition to pay. They have these additional bills because like you said, the university doesn't support a lot of and it's going to be a lot of like Black and Latino students, right, who end up working these jobs. The university doesn't support them the way they should. These students end up having to take up these jobs, and they're paid like nothing. So we have chapters in universities fighting for $15 still, right? A lot of these schools still don't pay their students $15 an hour. And they're also fighting around issues of safety at their workplace. So,
could you give an example of the safety issue?
Yes, and this affects not only the workers but also the students in that building. But because of like the economic issues people have been facing after the economic crisis, and like prices going up, students are more like cognizant of how much they're paid, how much they have to pay, and they're looking at the school around them is in shambles, right? Where does all this money go? At the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, they actually found out that there was a building that didn't have any carbon monoxide detectors, and over a dozen students, workers, and staff actually had to go to the hospital because of I believe it was a gas leak, or, they were unable to be, kept safe. And the students are rallying, the SDS chapter there is rallying for the implementation of carbon monoxide detectors, and the school hasn't put any in there. They're just acting like this didn't happen. They're acting like they can sweep it under the rug. And it's just one more example of, issues that affect students and workers from these greedy administrators that, our students are bringing to light.
Yeah, I know, you mentioned Sodexo and Aramark, and I know they're common at all the different campuses. They're also common in our public schools, high schools and primary schools. And often you have a terrible track record of any kind of social justice issue or anything like that. How do you? What's the relationship between SDS and, say, Aramark or somebody like that?
Oh yeah, terrible, terrible relation. Very hostile, full of conflict. It started by Aramark, but recently our Kent State SDS chapter actually won a campaign to get their school to divest from Aramark. And to cancel their contract with Aramark, because Aramark was using prison labor, right? Not at the school, but, by sheer virtue of using that prison labor, the students said, well, we don't want, our tuition money going here, because, the students are paying for it, right? And they had protests for a year, and this was in the midst of the first stage of the pandemic too. So even though the protests were not humongous, they still ended up winning. And, I think that's huge, because divestment campaigns are actually, it's pretty hard to win those. And then, actually there's an SDS chapter that used to be at the University of Florida, and they also won a campaign against Aramark. Aramark was underpaying drastically a lot of the Central American immigrant farm workers who were living in Immokalee, Florida, getting less than a penny per pound of tomatoes that they picked. And the students joined up with a campaign to increase that pay and ended up winning. And that was also against Aramark. So because Aramark is everywhere and they do these horrible practices, they will be the students' favorite target for a while yet, probably.
well, keep up the good work. And I know the workers, whether they're campus workers or other, appreciate that and appreciate the support of students. I know when I was at the University of Chicago and students joined our protests, our pickets, or whatever we were doing, it just meant so much. It was a big lift, and so. I think the students at the University of Chicago, but also SDS and wherever you're doing this kind of really good work, so it's deeply appreciated.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you also, moving to the next issue, CIA off campus. It's an issue that I know they were fighting again at the University of Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago. And so could you give us a little bit of an update on what's going on with that, or if it's,
yes.
how we're trying to deal with this?
Yeah. No, thanks for asking, because, I feel like I'm going to be the SDS's, ultimate hype man today.
That's good.
That's what they get for doing such awesome work.
That's right.
But yeah, that's actually another campaign that students have won recently. So at the University of Illinois Chicago SDS chapter, they've been fighting for over a year now, a campaign to get the university to end. It was actually going to be one of the first universities to sign on to this new contract with the CIA to allow them to recruit more directly on campus, to table very aggressively on campus, and to funnel some of their, newly graduated or graduating students who spoke certain languages like Arabic or, I think there's a whole list of languages to join the CIA directly. So the students actually said, again, I'm not paying for that. My tuition dollars should not go to such a hateful campaign. We know that it's going to be used to create agents who will perpetuate these unjust wars and unjust foreign policy in these other countries. So they actually rallied to get the contract canceled, and it did. And, it's great because the program is new. So hopefully that stops it in their tracks at all the other schools where they're trying to implement it.
So let me try to take this in a little bit of a different direction for a minute. I want as a student organizer, it's you're talking to people that there's waves and flows of the semester. They start out, okay, I have a little bit of time, and then they have finals before they know it, and they're falling behind in their classes because that's what students do, and then they panic and they and whatever. That's exactly. So this sounds familiar to you. But also there's a certain amount of I don't have time for this, or and even apathy. I don't. Why should I care about women's rights or something, whatever the issue is? And so how do you how do you address that, and how do you get students involved, and how do you organize students? What's effective?
That's a great question, and one that I get all the time, and probably all the other SDSers get all the time. Like you'll have a lot of college students who are trying to get a degree, right? And maybe they're trying to get a degree because they want like a comfortable like management job, or their parents are pushing them in that direction. So you'll get a lot of students who say, oh, I don't think that anyone at my school will actually be interested in these things, and people don't seem to care, and they're too rich. And we tell them, look, like that has been the state of the student movement for a long time, and yet students are still political, right? They're in school to learn, and they get all these ideas. They're like they're reading the news, they're reading articles about like why these things are happening. They're politically activated to an extent, and there are students out there who would join us. We just need to get out there and find them, right? And that is not going to be easy. It's going to start small. Like it's always going to start small. Like maybe you do have your days where you have the 1,000-person protest to defend the right to choose to have an abortion. But most days it'll be you and a couple students and your table, right? And you have to get out there and you have to get those petition signatures. You have to talk to people you don't know. You just have to do it. And that way our activists will be prepared for when there are times where a lot of people will suddenly want to be in the movement. We know what to do. We're not going to hesitate. And, like you said, the student life is definitely kind of strange. It's got a very tight timeline, like exams are definitely, a sign that, okay, we're not going to be able to get much people out. And it's, the students are living pretty fast lives, right? Like they're transferring to different schools. They're like taking up jobs or, graduating early. So each semester you only really have 16 weeks to make it happen, to make building your chapter happen. But because of the fact that these students are all living on top of each other, studying everything, you can do it fast. You can build a chapter really fast. You just have to be committed. You have to be, willing to print out hundreds of flyers and, sit out there for hours. And then it can be done. But
so, what effect has the pandemic had on the student movement?
Oh gosh.
And how does that look right now? I don't know. Hopefully, we're coming out of it. I'm not a scientist, but is that starting to change?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was really rough. 2020 campuses were just straight up closed down. So we had to get creative. We had to have a lot of virtual meetings, which were effective at first, but in the long run, kind of a little demoralizing. Like you want to be able to see people's faces when you have a conversation with them, right? So it was tough to keep up, but because we looked at the example of other social movements, like the Free Them All car caravan in Chicago and Minneapolis, and to free prisoners and people in detention centers, which were becoming like COVID hotspots. We looked to that for inspiration and saw that was huge. So when racist vigilantes actually killed Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, our students were actually able to immediately organize their own car caravans, right? And that kept us organizing. That kept us like still calling and going to protest downtown. So by the time the George Floyd uprising began, we were able to take part in that. But it was really tough to do that for a whole year. We weren't able to get many of our own members because campuses were closed. It was kind of hard. But now I think things are starting to change, because firmly in fall 2021 was when campuses resumed in person. We started the mission of getting everyone, used to tabling on campus again, right? Like, don't wait, don't hesitate, just go out and do it. Do it safely, wear a mask. People have QR codes on their sign-up sheets now. Fall 2021 kind of started off with like a huge attack on the people, right? The Texas heartbeat bill, abortion ban bill. And that's what, we kind of got moving right away.
So if I was, a high school senior listening to Fight Back Radio right now, or if I was a college student, and I said, you know what, we should have an SDS chapter here.
Yeah.
What would I do? How do I get a hold of Chrisley and say, or whoever? What's the process?
Yeah.
And what has to be done to get that going?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a website, newsds.org. You can sign up to start a chapter there that will loop you directly into our national network of SDS chapters. And then we also tell people, look, as you get looped in with us, just start. Just go ahead and start. You just need to think about your first meeting. You need to think about what issues people care about and what things people are fighting for around you. Put that on a flyer, print it out, get out there. If you have a group of friends who want to do this with you, kind of all work together, right? Try to build a group and just start. And again, signing up with National SDS, we will be able to give you the support you need at that point, right? So that's newsds.org. We even have a chapter building kit on our website that has sample templated flyers, sign-up sheets, even a charter for when you are turning in paperwork for your chapter. You can just update that and use it.
So if I'm listening to this and I'm saying, okay, that sounds good, Chrisley, I want to start my chapter. I'll call a meeting. So I make a flyer. What should the meeting happen? What should we do? What would be your advice? Just in the abstract.
Yeah, definitely. So once you have signed up with us, one of our volunteers will contact you and sort of walk you through. Okay, if you are nearing exam time, then we can talk to you about. Okay, here's how to. Here's some tips that you can use. But we'll most likely talk you through how to have your first meeting, how to do outreach for the first time, how to figure out what you should be organizing around locally. We'll suggest the different national campaigns to you, right? The Students Fight for Police Accountability. That's one of our national campaigns. It's got all kinds of demands in it, right? Defunding police, demilitarizing police. Some students were fighting for campus control of the police at one point. So we'll reach out and talk to you about that. But if you know that there are students who want a particular kind of protest, organize it. Don't hesitate, and reach out to us.
So how does SDS decide what's going to be a national campaign? Do you have some sort of structure, or do you have meetings or conventions, or how does that work? Yeah,
definitely. So we have bi-weekly phone calls. Sometimes we bump them up to weekly if we're organizing our convention. The other way we get in touch. But we have phone calls, and if you sign up with us, we can loop you into those right away as we help you build our chapter. We have a chat group that we can also rope you into, full of, hundreds of activists who are all talking to each other and comparing flyers, and, we can involve you in that. And then we do have an SDS convention every year that we proudly organize. It's going to have tons of speakers, lots of workshops. People will talk about, their wins and their losses, right? And we actually have one coming up this October 15th and 16th at Kent State University, which is kind of historical to us.
Why is Kent State historical?
Yes, so Kent State actually was the site of a student protest in 1970 against the Vietnam War, which was, it was really huge. And the police, or the National Guard, actually ended up shooting and killing 4 students in the crowd, and it was a huge national, it caused a huge national uproar around the country because these were students, fighting to not get conscripted into, the Vietnam War, and, they were killed for their trouble. There was actually a shooting in the same year at Jackson State University of black students, by the way, too, where 2 students were killed by police forces in that case, who were also protesting for issues related to black students as well as against the war. And that one doesn't get talked about as much. But, because of that that shooting at Kent State, there are students who have had protests in the years afterwards, sort of remembering the students who were martyrs to the anti-Vietnam War movement. And in fact, our SDS chapter, even today, still has an event every May 4th in commemoration of those students. And students in other places have done the same.
No, that was touching. I'm old, but I remember some of the protests about Kent State, and they died protesting. Nixon wanted to expand the war into Cambodia, President Nixon at that time, and pretty much every university in the country shut down. But and there was martial law in Kent, and they killed the students there, and so it's definitely is historic. And so I knew the answer to the question, but yes, thank you for telling us that.
I know. Thanks for asking. I was happy to get a chance to talk about it.
Absolutely. And we'll put in the show notes. We'll put the contact information that Chrisley mentioned, and we'll also put in the dates for the convention. So those of you who are college students, you should be at Kent State in October, and so we encourage you to do that. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Chrisley?
No, I'll just mention that we do have some social media. So we do have an Instagram. Our handle is newsds. We have our website, like I mentioned before, newsds.org, and we have a Twitter, also newsds. And other than that, I just want to say thank you for having me on here, Richard. This is amazing, and I know that it's a good crew that will listen to Fight Back Radio, and I am hopeful for all the students. And if people want to debate me on anything too, feel free to reach out. I know that there's a lot of people organizing around there, and it means there's a lot of political discussion, which is really good.
Thank you so much, Chrisley. You've been an excellent guest.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Good luck.
Yes.
So there you have it, a little bit of a capsule of our modern day student movement, and it's exciting. And I want to thank Chrisley for being our guest here. I promise you'll hear more about Chrisley Carpio. Also, I want to thank all of the Fight Back listeners and encourage them to turn out for the National Day of Action, September 7th, for reproductive rights. September 7th, Reproductive Rights Student National Day of Action. And you can, we'll put in the show notes the contact info that Chrisley talked about at the end there, so you can get a hold of SDS if you want to know how you can get involved or what's going on your campus, and if whatever. I mean, just start something on your own if you're on a campus without an SDS chapter, and tell them what you did. Take some pictures and Instagram, whatever. We'll put all this, as I said, in the show notes. Also, in the intro, what I talked about theory and about red theory and how to find that at fightbacknews.org or frso.org. We'll have that in the show notes as well. But also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the host of the Red Theory Study Series. One of the co-hosts is Chrisley Carpio, so our guest today. So you can tune in and on YouTube or come to the next session, which is August 25th. Also, I want to encourage people to go to Fight Back News. There's information about the struggle and what's going on across the country and what's going on in our movement. And so it's fightbacknews.org, and it's a great place to do that. Finally, if you want to reach me or Fight Back Radio, you can at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. And, again, be sure, to tell a friend, like, subscribe, tweet, share it on Facebook, write a review. All these things, help people find us. Finally, much appreciation to Chrisley Carpio. And I want to thank especially our production team of Vince Olson and Shane Tremley. Nothing happens without them. So for our entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg saying until next time, all power to the people.